Welcome back, ladies and gents. We're doing another roundtable on film by era, the highlights, and ever-changing genres, marketing, and entertainment value. Here, from the SIP list, Amanda Kohlhofer, how are you?
I am great. How are you?
I cannot complain. I'm glad you could join us.
Me too. I love the topic, so I'm ready to talk.
Yeah, we're both 90s people. And
yeah.
So, we've talked already how music was changing, alternative music is becoming a thing, and just different kind of subgenres enter the equation.
Mm-hmm.
With movies, it's kind of interesting how basically anybody who has like a radio show or a TV show gets a movie.
Yeah.
Everyone, right? Yeah, everyone can do a biography, Larry Flint, whatever. Yeah, it's like, and this is kind of where movies are just very hard to separate from the knockoffs that are on the blockbuster shelf. It's like every other movie is about killer cyborgs or erotic thrillers or about people playing basketball or smoking pot comedies, and it's just
the 90s had a lot of that.
Yeah, this is pretty much where we enter the age. It's like we didn't know if it was made for TV or straight to video or even played in a festival for a week. We just blindly buy it and discover it, and it's kind of just wild how we start having the twin movies where everyone's got to have a western or a asteroid epic kind of face off, and it's interesting here too because like with all the movies that are clones, like those kind of find their own audience. Like there's many movies that do knockoffs of Terminator 2 or Star Trek or even freaking Scream, and it's just like those find their own audience. But
yeah,
I think those are all kind of the highlights in that they're just one-upping the 80s to some extent. They're even the music I find kind of dates pretty well in the 90s compared to say the 2000s, which were just going with whatever was currently playing and not thinking twice if it actually served the purpose of the movie.
I will still maintain that the 90s was our best decade as a population. The 80s would be a close second, but I just feel like the 90s was,
90s
just like the best of everything.
There's a market for everything. There's underground horror movies are still a thing. There's some neo-noir to hard-boiled mystery and even cops versus robbers films. There's some crooked cops and political scandal thrillers that are very intriguing still, and we start seeing a lot of cyberpunk and computer hacking kind of material. Is just like, and you would see all these movies kind of just be kind of similar of each other. We have people who go on to do bigger stuff in the 2000s for better or worse, like Tony Scott, Michael Bay of all people, even Catherine Bigelow, future award winner, war movies, and
love her.
Yeah, and James Cameron kind of fizzles out for years trying to make Avatar after this, but he has a bunch of hits with her and
anytime a kick-ass woman can beat her ex-husband out for best director at the Oscars, I'm here for it. Right. I was like just jumping up screaming for her that year. I was like, yes.
I was like, both of these movies are overrated, but I'll take hers over his lifeless film that didn't even try. I don't. Yeah. And it's like we start seeing more actor turned directors like Robert Redford and freaking Kevin Costner, and it's even funnier how we see more in movie advertising, but to some extent it kind of works, and we kind of forget about just the common flops like Super Mario Brothers, or other video game adaptations. We're just like, okay, but
wasn't the best.
Yeah, John Stiles is kind of a big name with indie guys. I know Wes Anderson creeps up later on, but I mean, Stiles is interesting because he and a bunch of other guys kind of are following the John Cassavetes thing of just, filming movies over the weekends with their actor friends and launching the careers of unknown just like David Strathairn, Angela Bassett, and it's
just awesome.
Totally. John Singleton is big and makes just such relatable movies that are more than just, set in the hood or college, but just very coming of age. And, Coppola kind of resorts to being a producer. So does George Lucas. They do a lot of TV venue things. And Spielberg is still, experimenting with both movies and TV, like trying to do 4 giant projects a year, whether he's producing and directing 2 of them. And we see Brian De Palma experimenting even more, for better or worse. We see everyday average Joes like Keanu Reeves and Tom Cruise becoming action stars. Denzel Washington kind of launches into that. Liam Neeson does a bit of that, but he's not acknowledged until like 2 decades later.
Right. Yeah. He has a special set of skills. Yes. Not in the 90s.
He was in Wait, other than Rob Roy.
You know, an interesting thing too about the 90s is that like you get these clusters of movies which are with SNL stars, so similar to like the SNL 80s movies.
Thank you so much. I knew I was forgetting something. It's Coneheads, Wayne's World.
Wayne's World and Billy Madison and Happy Gilmore and Tommy Boy and Wayne's World. Like
the In Living Color and Mad TV guys get in on it.
Yeah.
And it's just like you see the Wayans and Tommy Davidson trying out a few different things, and it's the parody movie becomes in full swing with even just the Zucker brothers, Hot Shots film. So it's just funny how it was just so overkill in the 2000s when you get to Scary Movie and everything, but the 90s is just like there's something for everybody, whether it's Last Action Hero or some
I'm looking at my list and it's so versatile. Like
Robert Altman's The Player is like, man, what a good book you adapted there. Just on
I don't know if I've seen that one.
Various Hollywood stars even play themselves in that, and it's very funny.
Oh, okay. I like that. And then you got like the kind of the indie, like film noir indie stuff like Reservoir Dogs and Seven, and Reality Bites was kind of popularized because of, I think, mostly Winona Ryder and then Lisa Loeb's song, and like Swingers, like you just like those kind of clusters of movies were like a genre by themselves too. I liked them.
All these huge key people, and it's so funny how a lot of major directors who do a lot of indie horror, action, mystery, or crime movies they're still working now, but they're now like working on bigger indie films as actor turned directors, or they're directing and producing for TV. And those movies you mentioned there, I think, sum up basically just how you could pretty much just market a movie on just about anything. Like even putting reviews on it was enough to sell it versus, word of mouth or what are people on Facebook saying. We don't have social media as an obstacle. And you
just go to Blockbuster and say, hey, that box looks cool, let's check that out.
Right. I generally like stuff by this library of this company. I'll check it out.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting.
We get even more just independent movies that are you can put in pretty much any genre, like Death Machine, Hardware, or even Cube. Is like that kind of paralyzed people because you're just like, oh man, that's so creepy. Why was this not a hit at the festival it was at, but it's a hit on home video? And you pretty much just are able to have security in that you can financial security. And that is like your movie will find an audience, and an audience will talk about it many years later. It's like, oh yeah, I did see that on one of the movie channels. HBO starts doing the world premiere where they find a lot of independent or made for TV movies that they premiere like a few months before they hit video stores. So that's kind of a cool tie-in, even though they're not part of their studio. But it's also interesting how just at that point everyone's just so consistent. Like character actors are in just full swing. They're just like constantly like doing a guest spot and then appearing in like 3 major pictures that they're later remembered for. And
it's like, what about all that other stuff?
You're right, and that says a lot because we're still in the prejudice of, you know, actors who were better known for TV and attempted to do movies. Like I'm looking at you,
Hmm.
Matt LeBlanc or David Caruso, and it doesn't pan out. And then meanwhile, people who are mega TV stars from the 80s still keep doing a few shows that last 1 to 2 seasons, like Scott Bakula and Richard
Yeah.
and before they, uh, start going to the next era and last a while. But it's just so interesting how it's just like there's a market for everybody. There's just
Yeah. I think social media helps a lot with that now too, with like, because so many TV stars are, well, it goes back and forth now too, especially with streaming. I mean, whoever thought they'd see Reese Witherspoon on a TV show? And she's had, now granted, they're limited series, but still, or like Nicole Kidman. Everyone thought I'd see Nicole Kidman doing like a TV show. So you get, it kind of goes both ways, but
the
like,
role of reversal. Yeah.
yeah, would John Krasinski be the star he is if The Office had been on in the 80s? Like, would he have transitioned to film as well in the 80s as he does now?
Yeah,
Like,
he might have even just stayed in only TV, at that
or
point.
even, or even Steve. I mean, just it's interesting, but I think social media obviously helps. I mean, because it's not like those other people were bad actors, and John Krasinski's a good actor. Like, that's just
Yeah,
my
no,
example. But
yeah,
you
it's
know,
just they're trying to get there's a few people who get through the cracks of that prejudice of, oh,
hmm,
you can only do movies or TV. And it's just so wild too how uh, there's many people who become giant icons who are remembered for anything, whether it's being a talk show host or televangelist or a
right.
fitness coach. And then, yeah, the home video market pretty much blossoms during this time. A bunch of people basically become scream queens, creature feature
Mm.
people, or even kickboxing stars. And, and
Oh, Jean Claude.
right, and on the big and the small screen. And it's just wild
Yes.
how at this time is like you start seeing like breakthroughs on award-winning movies. You have some other lesser seen people. I mean, like Jane Campion becomes a
Hmm.
go-to foreign filmmaker with the Piano, and then Lee Tamahori does some lesser blockbusters years later after making the groundbreaking Once We're Warriors and the adventure film for David Mamet scripted as The Edge. You might have seen that Bear Attack movie.
Yeah.
Hopkins.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it just seems like at this point, I mean, building on those mentions you made, like Reservoir Dogs and Seven, it seems like
Hmm.
so many movies kind of sometimes they'll tip their hat to one another, while other times they're just direct
Hmm.
knockoffs, but they're enjoyable in their own right, or they're just similarly marketed. And this is where we see the commonly done home video media, where it's like coming soon or coming to theaters, and we, we're so used to seeing certain eye-catching previews, and this is basically where studios it's like I think around 96, 97 is when they were often noted as switching to hiring giant companies to do marketing for them instead of in studio.
Hmm.
But it is just wild too how just everyone just loves all kinds of catchy scripted material, and they uh, Aaron Sorkin is born out of this era for
Hmm.
switching to TV. And uh,
I love him.
totally, Rob Reiner is one of many, also another major actor turned director, and
Yeah.
Sundance is becoming a big thing for Redford, and
Right.
it's before he steps down because it's just too corporatized after a while. And
Yeah. I mean, I don't think the indie film scene is really like in the 90s, it was really indie, but now it's like, yes, it's
right,
indie, but it's like if you're not one of those movies now, like I think when American Beauty won the Academy Award, that was kind of like the turning of, because American Beauty I didn't even know what it was. I saw it in the theater because the movie I wanted to see was sold out. And I was like, oh, this is really good. And then it won the Oscar, but nobody had even heard of it. And now it's like, that's just kind of how it is now. It's like movies you've barely heard of are the ones winning the awards. So it's like you have to be one of those movies to win Oscars now.
yeah, in this day and age, I don't even consider 2 million all that low budget anymore. It's like I'm more
No.
impressed if you can do it 10, 20,000, because technically, like near the start of the 2000s, you start seeing some digital, but in the 90s, like you could only do basically shoot on video or shoot on
Right.
actual film. So it's interesting seeing here how, I mean, people do all kinds of uh, different productions, and
Hmm.
no one's batting an eye seeing what the budget actually cost. But some of those guys are still becoming kind of movie mavericks in that they inspire other people. And then there's others who are kind of infamous now because they just are known for making trash. And then there's others
Yeah.
who
Well, and
just hit and
technology's
miss.
made it, you know, it's made given people the ability to do things that couldn't be done before, but that with I like technology a lot because I like what it brings to the table, but I also feel like it is less effort. Like not, it's still creativity, but I feel like it's not the same as having to be like, on Nightmare on Elm Street, having to build that set upside down for what was her name? Amanda Weiss, I think.
I think
Or
so.
like they built that upside down to see, and now it's just like they could just flip it upside down with a computer. um I read, I don't know if it's Ben Affleck's famous like Howard Stern interview a few months ago, but
Oh shit, I haven't seen that one.
well, there was
But
an
yeah, he
excerpt of it
launches
that
into here with
people gave people shit, but yeah, he was talking about filming Good Will Hunting, and he's like, we had a video camera and we had to do all this stuff, and he's like, everything we did with Good Will Hunting people can do from their cell phones now. So
yep.
it's like, it's just not the same kind of, and that's not a bad thing, but especially with horror, I really appreciate
Well,
the
and
ingenuity of
we're working with
having to actually
corporate.
build something. Yeah.
Yeah, and the corporate guys, they hate it when you talk smack about them. It's like, well, it's true, and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, you that there. I had some friends last year who filmed a movie in like Tennessee or whatever, and I thought it was very theatrical looking and very
Mm-hmm.
intriguing, and
Sorry.
it's all good. It's gonna appeal to many people. It's called Witch House, and I
Oh,
think that's just it. Like pretty much the '90s just introduces just something for everyone.
yeah.
Uh, there's musicals, there's college humor kind of things, there's
Mm-hmm.
movies that probably without them the internet might not even be what it is with viral
Yeah, I
videos.
mean, American Pie, hello.
Yeah,
I still remember seeing that in the theater and the entire reaction of the theater when Allison Hannigan talks about the flute. I don't think I've ever laughed that hard in my entire life up to that point. And it was so, I mean, already the movie had been raunchy, but it was so, I had seen something about Mary. So that was like really the first super raunchy like that I had seen. But man, watching American Pie for the first time in a theater with other college kids my age was like it was a fun experience.
well, and that, yeah, following on that, I mean, yeah, I mean, uh we pretty much had the return of 80s horror icons like Freddy and Jason, but then we also
Mm-hmm.
have newcomers like Pinhead from Hellraiser still a thing. Candyman is
Mm-hmm.
a pretty rampant, but we have a lot
And
of
Scream.
vampires. Yeah,
Yeah.
everyone's trying to do a serial killer movie that's either Seven or Scream inspired, and
Mm-hmm.
but like when you get to the college ones, it's funny how they would promote those, and half the time they would have to decide how much even restroom humor they could even show in the trailer
Right.
to get a
Yeah,
PG,
does not very much.
right?
You know
And
who else had a really big decade in the 90s? I feel like is Stephen King. I feel like his books just like movie after movie after movie, and they weren't all fantastic by any means, but
yeah, him and Michael Crichton are like just the
yeah.
go-to. Is like they got a mini series on ABC or NBC every fall, in addition to
Hmm.
two different adaptations coming out each year, which they either do or don't approve of. And
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. The Newsstand was weird for me, and The Outsiders was really, which I have not read The Outsiders. I have a very huge Stephen King collection. I'm a bit of a fan. So I've read a lot of them, but
I've
I
heard good
have
stuff about The Outsider, but yeah, I haven't heard anything good about The Newsstand. It
it
ran for
wasn't
like
great. The Outsider was good, but you really have to watch it consistently or you forget and
oh,
you
and
get
everything you do,
confused.
you got to
Yeah,
do that now with a lot of
that's
Amazon
true.
shows, like what's the one, Bosch and The Expanse, for the same way. I'm like,
Oh yeah.
guys, I got to do 3 to 5 episodes a night. I
Hmm.
will forget something. This is very meticulous about detail, and not even Netflix you can say the same about. They were kind of they kind of want to do a mixture of serialized and,
Mm-hmm.
well, we'll do 3 episodes that are kind of about nothing and just filling time, and they'll all make sense near the end. It's like, damn,
Yeah.
it's going to be
No,
awkward.
Severance is like that too. I don't know if you've watched Severance on Apple TV, but
There we go. Ben Stiller connection is like with all the stuff that he does in the 90s.
And now he's
like the Cable Guy was a flop at the time, but you watch it now along with Jim Carrey's other, who was in that, his other satire, The Truman Show, is like so many movies. It's like it was hard to market because people were not used to kind of pretty much if you wanted any freedom, it had to be kind of a freaky show that was shown in the after hours, like Homicide, Life on the Street, or Millennium, just like,
oh yeah.
If you wanted to get edgy or shoot on a camcorder or give it that home video look, and
like Taxi Cab Confessions.
Right. HBO, when they get rid of Tales from the Crypt, go with even more just complex stuff to where you're like, I'm not sure who's the audience for this, but this is wild. And I just always
somebody will watch it. I love Tales from the Crypt.
Tales from the Crypt. I went through all of Oz recently, and I think it's groundbreaking because of how many not only future movie stars are in that, but future TV stars, and it's literally a repeat of what the guys did on Homicide, in that they're just but I love how they also kind of mock some of the HBO programming at the time, and it's just wild how HBO does start doing some movies that play in theaters, but then they do some movies that premiere on their channel that are intriguing, and it's just so interesting how this is where they kind of have more like sneak previews and just movies that are kind of just word of mouth. I still on occasion will even encounter people who haven't even seen other blockbusters from this period, like say Silence of the Lambs, or
what,
Dave, or Blade, or even freaking The Fugitive. It's just like, for real. So I just love how we get all kinds of movie stars who are big, who are busting moves, and they are, even if no one likes them, they still is like they're a powerhouse star. It's just like
well, think about Julia Roberts. I mean,
right?
She had a couple. I mean, like for Mystic Pizza, freaking love that movie from the 80s. But Pretty Woman was like her breakout hit, and she's was basically an unknown, and now she's just this freaking megastar because they were smart enough to make a movie that with great actors, and it just landed with people. Like it really connected with people, and I feel like without Pretty Woman, she'd probably not be the star she is today, even though she definitely had the potential with prior movies. But that was like her, her groundbreaking movie.
Basically 1990, like that beginning of the decade is what determines what you do for the rest of the era. And it's just so wild how she and other actors become kind of it's like they got to stay in that kind of movie. Like Jodie Foster has to be constantly stalked. Harrison Ford has to be constantly saving his wife and kid. And Julia Roberts and Hugh Grant will probably do a romantic comedy. But it's funny how this is like, then there's other people who kind of try to experiment. Like Wesley Snipes does do a lot of martial arts buddy movies, but then he'll do like just some kind of very serious movie like To Wong Fu, and you're just like, man, what a great cast. And I don't know who else could do. Movie. Oh, it's great, but I don't know who else could have done that at the time with the whole. Right. Because we're still. This is a very cool era in that we're still trying to get through some bigotry and homophobia that's going on, and it's so interesting seeing which ones kind of got a progressive voice but don't make any money. You want to bring up drag queens and other things. What's it called? Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. It's just also a great movie. And
I don't know that one.
Okay, that has Hugo Weaving, Guy Pearce, and Terrence Stamp.
Taking notes. Love Guy Pearce.
Another Aussie movie, and that's what I love too. It's just like we're like pretty much all our New Zealand Aussie stars that are big powerhouses, like Hugh Jackman and Russell Crowe, kind of come up near the end of this era, doing a lot of movies that are known in their region, and now we don't even think about them because they're part of every other giant franchise. And I love how they would give a movie to just about anybody. It could be a radio host. It could be a comedian prankster. It could be an NBA all-star or a rapper, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think about, Poetic Justice, which wasn't like a huge hit by any means, but it's a
Tupac
movie
and
that I
Janet
really love.
Jackson.
But yeah, Tupac
Yeah.
and Janet Jackson, like who would have thought they'd be, starring in a movie? Like, and although Tupac was briefly in Nothing But Trouble, but
Well, yeah.
I think that's an 80s.
He
I think
no
it's
no
80s.
no. It's 90s, but
Is it 90s? Okay, I can't remember.
that's the other thing too. We get into more just bizarre comedies that are
So
hard to
bizarre.
fathom.
That's one of
Yeah,
the weirdest movies I've ever seen.
I don't think I made it through all the way, but it's like get plenty of other movies just with bizarre effects and very meta humor, and other
Mm-hmm.
movies that people just absolutely hated in theaters but kept renting from the video stores or
Like Dumb and
recording.
Dumber.
Right, there you go. It's just like it's so interesting seeing even people debate about something like Big Lebowski or
Mm-hmm.
even one of Tarantino's produced movies that is kind of a hit now but wasn't then, like Natural Born Killers or True Romance. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just so funny how everyone's work kind of just evolves in some capacity, and it's just wilder how no one can even agree on what is their best hour. You know,
Right. I think about like I'm looking at, like, I just wrote down some of my favorite movies of the 90s, and I have like 20 something on my list, but and I don't know if it's because I grew up in the 90s. So in 1990 I was 11. So I really like came of age through the 90s and then started college at the very end of the 90s. So it's like those are probably the movies that stay with me the most, and then I've watched them over and over, but I really do feel like this is the decade of just the most quotable movies.
even people
And
who are struggling during this time, like Eddie Murphy, you know, are still kind of big. You know, people want to see a
yeah.
movie they're in. Um, we get so many other actors who are just second place now who get bit parts in all kinds of movies of various quality, like Samuel L. Jackson and Danny Trejo. You know, so it's like,
Oh, Danny Trejo.
right, this is the birth of the character actor. Basically, is like, yes, we got
Yeah.
plenty of them in '80s who we remember from a weird slasher or a high school
Mm-hmm.
movie or a violent exploitation movie, but it's just like, yeah, but by this point they're pretty much just solidifying their second, third, and in some cases the fourth stages of their career. And
Yeah. Well, and like if you like, one of my favorites to look at people who really like became huge um is 10 Things I Hate About You. I mean, you think
yeah,
about Heath Ledger,
Shakespeare is a thing, is
Joseph.
transfer his
Yeah, the
work,
whole Shakespeare thing is a big deal.
make it a gang
um
movie, make it a romantic comedy, have it, you know, have it be a fun period piece with Monty Python type actors, you know.
yeah. And you think about Heath Ledger, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and even Julia Stiles, who doesn't do as
Yeah,
many movies now, still has a show. Allison Janney, that's like one of her older movies, and she, all these people are such. I mean, R.I.P. Heath Ledger, but it's just like so many of these people are. I look at Joseph Gordon-Levitt in that movie, I'm like, I can't even believe that's him. He's so young.
yeah, we knew him as the kid on Third Rock from the Sun who just had an
Yeah.
occasional playing a son or kid in a movie, and that was kind of just the go-to. Is like, if you're not on a
Mm-hmm.
giant procedural or sci-fi or doctor show, then you got to be in something, you know, like The Sandlot or
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like 10 Things I Hate About You, or even a, you know, it could be something as dumb as I Know What You Did Last Summer. You know, it's like
Mm-hmm.
you got to be in something major. It's like for everyone to just kind of capitalize on it. It can even be a talking animal movie like Babe. You know, it's just like,
I
yes,
love Babe.
yeah. And that's kind of where I just stopped watching like kind of animated movies after a while, because like when the 2000s they would do it and it would just be
Yeah.
so forced with, and I mean, it's just so cool to see how what blockbusters they did a good job recreating Jurassic Park type technology, and other ones
Mm-hmm.
that just they had ideas, they had the cast, but boy howdy did they, it was the execution not there. They get more movies to people who are known for doing special effects and music videos,
Yeah.
the helm a movie, and some of them keep on making movies and others kind of just disappear after this decade,
Yeah.
go back to what they were doing prior. And it's uh, I out of this decade, I think it has even just the more interesting stories, because you got so many stories that now, if you were to do it, it's kind of would be illegal. You see so many
Hmm.
actors who have career fumbles because basically they're locked into a contract that they can't get out of without having to basically pay everyone
Hmm.
like 200 million back if they forfeit. It's like, man, and nowadays you can't do that. But
No.
kind of how shady some studios could be at some points, and you didn't know how much of it was the studio versus the producer.
Yeah. And that gets upsetting too, but there's so much information out that now with all the different documentaries that it's like, and then even too with like Johnny Depp's trial, like you're really hearing all this inside information of how stuff works, and it gets to be really upsetting because it's like, man,
We like to think it's a simple shake of
yeah.
hand, and it's not. We
It's
see
definitely not.
all these other producers who are no longer favored in the Hollywood community, like Joel
Hmm.
Silver pissed too many people off at Warner Brothers, and then Amy Pascal is kind of the infamous Sony gal whose emails leaked, but yeah, she began
Yeah.
her career during this time. Lorenzo di Bonaventura says in the Superman Lives documentary how Warner Brothers never figured out its marketing, and it
Mm.
had so many blockbuster movies like A Time to Kill and
Yeah.
Batman's and just various other giant hits, and then just other flops that are considered good movies, but just they only made their money
Hmm.
back because they just got so used to having it be on their satellite channels. And it's wild too how, I mean, at that point, Lorenzo was head of marketing, like an assistant head of marketing, and here, he's now a major player in the producing game. But it's just so
Right.
wild how all these people who have been around for a while, pretty much by 94, everyone kind of knows who they are,
Yeah.
even if they don't see them or have IMDb in the infancy of the internet.
Right. Well, you think about Kevin Spacey. How many movies was he in the '90s, and people still didn't really know who he was? I mean,
Right, like Seven, he wasn't heavily promoted, but that was the same year as Usual Suspects, and he had already
right.
done some other movies like
And then he did American Beauty, and those were all under the radar. Like,
LA
and then
Confidential, and that's
yeah,
that's
God,
a
I love
mega.
that movie.
Yeah, that's I
Sorry.
see some people is like that's how you should get into detective movies if you haven't now, before you watch all of
Hmm.
the classic black and white.
Or if you want to get into film noir, but you're not really sure where to start, like I feel like that's a newer like film noir that you could watch and then go back and watch some older ones. Like,
Right, like The Big Sleep, or
yeah, dip your feet in. I don't know. The other thing I hate when you think about like, so Harvey Weinstein and you hear about all this stuff that now it's like, I, it's good that we know this stuff that we know now and that people are being held accountable, but it also, and not that this matters in the grand scheme of things, but it just makes you wonder, like you go back and watch some of your favorite movies. How many of those people didn't want to do that movie? Or how many of those people didn't want to play that part, especially in like, the blockbusters and people that get tied into contracts with studios? It's like, man, so and so was fantastic in this movie and I love them in that role. And the whole time they just hated their life making the movie. Like that just bums you
yeah.
out?
Oh, totally. I love it how we see a few kid actors. I mean, Levitt's definitely one of them, but there's like a few others who's like they didn't have a McCulkey Culkin type, where it's like their scam artist was their
Right.
father, you know.
Ugh.
And it's so wild how so many of them kind of immortalized the '90s, and yet when you see them in a movie now, and you're just like, yeah, no, it's the best is left. You did too much plastic surgery to your face, but unfortunately, this is unfortunately the start of that, where everyone gets work done.
Yeah. Yeah. Aging gracefully is not, but also I understand it because everybody, especially women in Hollywood, have an expiration date, and it's a way sooner date than men have. It's like you can be Harrison Ford in a movie, but he's still seducing a 30-year-old woman, and he's 70. And it's like,
Right.
why can't you put him with somebody his own age? No, it's got to be like, sorry, don't get me started on this because it makes me so upset. Like the double standard and the standard of beauty.
Pretty much what this is what the '90s, it brings up all these good ideas, but it does, like you say, kind of, some of those movies are a great example of do as I say, not as I do.
Mm-hmm.
It's like please the crowds, but the people who are representing or in this image aren't necessarily, the good guy they're on
Right.
that they play on screen. They're kind of a bad boy behind the scenes. So we see a lot of actors who do a lot of movies that like play in like countries overseas, like Bulgaria and Japan, like Rutger
Mm-hmm.
Hauer, and
Oh
even
yeah.
even martial artists like Dolph Lundgren. And it's like, okay, well,
You will
it's a,
lose.
you will lose. And we see so many movies too that also have like a director's cut years later, and you're just like, man, had that
Mm-hmm.
been the one that played in theaters, this would have been a bigger hit, like Johnny Mnemonic. And uh, even just other just sci-fi blockbusters where you're just like, yeah, I can't imagine watching it, without the special edition. It would be such a different movie. And
Right.
um
That's
and
crazy.
you're like, yeah, and you can't convince certain people to watch it because they're like, oh, I saw that when that came out, that sucked. And you're like, I'm telling you, man, it's not as bad as you remember it. It's just you saw the crappy, cut down version with the awkward music and the
Right.
overacting. Is like, if you watch the differently scored and edited version, it's a whole different movie. But this is what I love too, is like then people would just kind of, that's what was also kind of the fun of a video store. And I love all the podcasts I listen to now because some of them will remind us, is like, yeah, videotapes were $50 a piece. That's what they
Yeah.
cost. And
Wow.
because they were
I
made
mean,
for a
going to
limited run.
Blockbuster on a Friday night was there was nothing better than having, your boyfriend pick you up and you go to Blockbuster and you rent a movie and you go back to one of your houses and you watch it. And, it's just like you're watching the movie, but also it's like, are we going to kiss? Are we not going to kiss? What's going to happen? Like, but it's all tied to, even though it's like, that's a whole separate thing. I don't know, for me, I'm so tied to video stores as like, of so many of my good memories of even just with me and my brother arguing over what movie to pick, or, you know, they're like, oh, buy one, get one free, or, rent one, get one free. And now we get to pick two movies. And it's just like, you think that that's like the prime of your life right there, and it's
Right.
like, now everything's
Nothing else
online.
matters.
Yeah. Like going to Blockbuster was a treat, especially before you're old enough to drive. And even then it was a date night, it was just, or you go with your friends and you just look at all the movies and you go, I wonder what this is about, and look at this box. And honestly, that's how I got introduced to a lot of old B horror movies,
And
because
it helped that we had stuff like Tremors or freaking Starship Troopers, and those are movies that are very
yeah.
satirical, but you get all kinds of audiences. You get people who take those at face value versus actually get the joke and like them in a
Mm-hmm.
Gremlins or Evil Dead kind of way. And it's just so
Yeah.
funny how just half the other people from the 80s, like Stuart Gordon or Joe Dante, kind of have to recreate themselves in the 90s. And
Yeah.
we see more bigger examples of mercenary moves where it's just like, okay, you do two, mega mainstream independent pictures, and then you do a big studio picture, and it either decimates your career or it makes you even better known. But it's entertaining to the masses, but it's less entertaining to the fans who have been your fans for a while. So it is cool just
Yeah.
seeing how, again, how everyone recreates themselves. And like you said earlier, which Saturday Night Live or In Living Color actor
Mm-hmm.
goes back to the show or gets fired and becomes a big A-lister, is like, yeah, you have to remind so many people, and some of them really just don't take off until like kind of the late 90s, early 2000s. And
Yeah.
we have to remind people, is like, yeah, Jamie Foxx, Steve Carell, all these other guys, Tina Fey, they've
Mm-hmm.
been around for a while, but
Forever. I mean,
they
Adam Sandler, he's still, and he has his own production company. And yeah, there's so many, so many SNL stars of the 90s that are still, rocking it out now. And it's
Mhm.
just like, yeah, they go, and there's a lot of those movies that were so stupid, as that you get. And I want to say, was Deuce Bigelow into the 2000s, or was that?
99, that
No,
counts.
it's
I
so close,
only saw part of it.
I mean, it's funny. It's not something I would watch over and over, but they kind of took those Billy Madison, Tommy Boy,
Oh yeah, it was
Happy
produced
Gilmore's,
by
and
Sandler. Yeah.
yeah, and then they kept trying to bank off that into the 2000s, and it just didn't work as well. But But I mean, Billy Madison and Happy Gilmore and Tommy Boy, yeah, they're all stupid, but I quote them all the damn time. Like, it's just because I don't know. They're funny to me. Like, I thought I was your snack pack. I say that at least once a week.
Oh, jeez. And there are definitely a lot of, I think this is the birth of just the immortal one-liners. Yes, there's some from the 80s, but by this point, everybody's just quoting a lot of giant mega 90s movies.
Oh,
And
yeah. I mean, I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. Like, yeah, you know. Or like, I don't know.
I
Just like
always
looking
wanted to be a gangster.
or like Clueless. Clueless made whatever like a real, every people would say whatever, but then it was like
They say it without even realizing they're saying it. And you're like, no, dude, listen.
yeah. Oh, and Empire Records was another one I meant to mention, and kind of like the more indie type movies. But it's interesting that now it's a movie that has like this huge cult following, kind of like how Clue in the '80s. Clue is one of my favorite movies of all time, by the way.
It's a good one.
Bombed at the theater, and then as it started to be showed on TV, just gained this huge cult following. And I feel like that's really true for a lot of '90s movies, like Empire Records, or I don't know what's some of the other ones we're talking about. No, I can't remember.
I had a pal on
But you
here.
know what
His
I mean.
favorite movie is PCU.
Yes, the PC. That is one of my husband's favorite
And
movies, and
lately, for
it's
whatever
really
reason,
funny.
I don't know if it's on streaming or whatever, there's been kind of a lot of remember this movie trends, and for whatever reason that
Yeah.
one keeps going on there. John Cassar, who's a major director for TV, like the Orville and 24, keeps posting how it was one of his first camera operating gigs.
Oh,
and
nice.
and again, that is John Favreau and a
Hmm.
bunch of other actor turned directors on it.
Yeah,
I don't think Peter Berg was in it, but he's in a bunch of other giant movies. It's just so wild seeing all these other guys.
I
Just like,
know. And John Favreau is fantastic and has been since the '90s, since PCU and Swingers, and you know all those movies. Like, I really love him. He's gone on to have a big career.
yeah, and it just took a while to just kind of even remember what everyone's good at and what they're known for. And it just seems like he was one of those. He was doing some mega movies, and then he had to remind everyone, he's like, "Hey, I'm an independent blockbuster guy. I'm gonna
Right.
bring in all my guys on, and we're gonna do this my way." And it's definitely the evolution of, again, modernized what we have today with insurance and mega productions, and doing an interesting mixture of just a more low key production, a more
Hmm.
quicker production. You have just as much attention for any movie, whether it's low budget or
Yeah.
big budget and mid budget, even in some capacity. Just
And that's cool, but you get really saturated, and it's just not. It's so much harder now to be like, oh, I saw, you know Chopping Mall, and have you seen this? It's like this stupid B horror movie, and it's like there are still B horror movies, but it's not the same as it was in the '80s and '90s, because they're all, if you have Shutter, you can see everything from old to even new movies that don't get mainstream attention, but they're still going to get so much attention because they're on a streaming service that millions of people subscribe to.
1,000%, you're just as likely to find people who want to see a Predator as they do something more lower budget like Maniac Cop or
Right.
Wishmaster. And it's
Wishmaster.
yes, that was another one. Is like it made its money back. They shot in like 2 months or something like that, and it made its money, but it was, you think with all the awful reviews, you're just like, oh, this can't be good. And then you see parts of it on something like Sci-Fi Channel or UPN, and you're like,
Hmm.
I love this. This is hysterical. This is great effects and
Yeah.
outrageous. But it's just so wild too how uh, we get into this thing of just movies that just evolve in form. Basically,
Hmm.
it's like now I'm at the fifth stage of my aftermath of my seeing how I'm doing in pop culture and how many
Yeah.
remember this for the good or wrong reasons.
I feel like Gen X is going to be really the last generation that's going to be able to remember and appreciate movies that pre CGI and digital and computer, because yes, people younger than me can go watch those movies, but I say we, I have no idea how old you are. I grew up on them. So
I was a 90s kid, but it was
I've
so
seen
funny.
the transition from, you know, Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street, where they're literally hand building, you know, these things, and they're hand constructing these sets and effects, and, you know,
oh yeah,
Friday the 13th, where they're slitting some girl's throat. Like, that's
you know how I became appreciative of special effects was I read a bunch of film history books, and one of the common ones who I was immortalized in my mind and I wanted to see everything he had worked on was Stan Winston, because there's a major player. Yeah, he's working on everything for Tim Burton to uh, something else that's inspired by his earlier hit Jurassic Park, and it. But like you say, yeah, it's like at that point everyone's not sure how they want to market their movie, but they're willing to take a chance, and it's electrifying. And as a little backtrack, would you say your folks introduced you more to movies? Because like it was a bit of that. Like I would hear people talk about it, and you know, TV was just way more diverse then. Like you could have just as much access to see something that had flopped in theaters at 2 a.m. on a cable station,
right,
as you could something that is a mega hit and it's going to be, you know, the Saturday night featured movie, you know?
yeah. I mean, honestly, HBO introduced me to movies mostly because my parents were very young parents. My mom was 19 and my dad was 21 when I was born, so they were very uninterested in being at home. And
My
I'm
father
not,
was a
you know,
big music fan, so he kept up with a lot of the names. My mother was still kind of stuck in the 80s. That was her music heyday. And they took me all over the place to the malls and, you know, the shopping for food and everything. So I heard all kinds of music, and I knew the song even if I didn't know the name. I'm like, I know that song.
right.
You might not know it, but anytime it's played in a movie or on the radio, and this is kind of the last hurrah. I mean, now on radio is like pretty much it's got to be kind of like after midnight when they have more freedom to choose what they want to play, and the station executives aren't telling them what to play. And but this is the 90s is definitely the last real giant hurrah where it's just like so many people are really listening to what gets promoted on the radio and hearing giant talk show hosts kind of challenge censorship. And you see so many other movies here that you're like, what would it be rated now 20 years later, 30 years later, that, you know, would have gotten a PG-13 or an X back in the day. But there's even other movies in the 90s that I'm surprised even escape with a PG or an R, because it's like the PG ones are allowed to say shit a few more times than 10. And then, you know, now that'd be 13 instantly, no no exception.
Well, and in Something About Mary, you see a quick clip of Ben Stiller's dick and it's still rated R, like, you know. Okay.
You see lots of just nudity that no one could see at hot speed, or even just very insensitive language that even the censors, when they modify it for TV, have trouble modifying it.
Right.
There's just no point. But I mean, there's some very grisly R-rated movies where you're like, man, someone took their 6-year-old to see this because they were a fan of sci-fi or horror. That's disturbing, because this is just very hard to watch.
It's interesting too to think about, like how some movies are rated PG, because PG-13 didn't come out until like 1985, I think, or like 1980, something like that. PG-13 was not a thing. It was
and you see various parents, they would look at what it's rated and they think, oh, it's okay for the whole family. I'm like, no. This PG movie still has the dog dying at the start before they come back as a ghost. This PG-13, it might
like, there's a lot of movies rated PG that I feel like today would have at least warranted a 13 rating, but they just didn't have it then, you know?
Totally. And the 90s, though, there are some movies in there, it's like, okay, it might be PG-13, but there's still some traumatic subject matter in here. And the R's, you know,
Or
they might as
raunchy.
well. They're very raunchy, or they're just very. There's blood in every frame. That it's a miracle they even
Mm-hmm.
got an R rating. Is like it's good, but you just gotta wait. You gotta wait till you're 16 because there's these other ones you can see and you'll be just fine. It's just a killer or non-stoppable creature attacking someone, but
Right.
these other ones, I mean, this is dealing with all kinds of chaotic, material.
I mean, my parents never monitored what I watched. So my brother and I, we watched cable TV, all day and all night whenever we were. So I saw Porky's when I was like 6 years old. I saw
Right.
I saw Halloween when I was like 5 years old. Halloween traumatized me my entire, like, I have never been more scared of anything. It's my favorite movie of all time now, but
And
it's
so
still
many
always,
stations would replay these kinds of
yeah.
movies. Now there's so many movies that many of the companies are very selective. Like they just
Hmm.
ABC and occasionally CBS, they would replay something, but it was often just whatever it was a big enough blockbuster. If it was R, it had to still be almost as
Hmm.
gritty as a CSI show. If it was PG 13, it's often going to be one of those superhero movies or
Right.
award winners. But so it stinks because like we were so used to seeing uh, CBS, Fox, and UPN and ABC would often, and even NBC more or less, would play a pretty well liked
Hmm.
blockbuster every Friday or Saturday, and
Yeah.
it is like that was where you saw it before you saw the repeat cable TV airing, and it was just like uh, and they would often do a lot of original made for TV movies, but they
Hmm.
just didn't do it because they just didn't were unimpressed with the ratings or changed
Yeah.
management. But I I used it a lot because it was a big reminder to me of what was big, what was huge, what
Hmm.
was the popular thing, and those trends just kind of they're there, but they just don't want to acknowledge them. And I'm just like, it was a good way for me because this was years before Sci-Fi Channel became kind of the we're gonna do
Right.
a wacky creature feature every week.
Hmm.
Guess which D-lister or Star Trek actor is in this, and Lifetime would be kind of here's a movie that's either in on the woman in peril or
Hmm.
douchey guy going after his ex movie, and here's a and then to make up for it, we're going to do a very well acted true life story starring X Files or Law and Order
Or
X.
somebody from Facts of Life or Full House or
Yeah, Full House, Saved by the Bell, or
one of those.
Buffy, or yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, but that's what I like too. Is like you could be on a campy or dorky show, and you could still make it into a movie, whether you were playing yourself or it was just your brief moment in a mainstream movie. It is like there's so many other movies. It's like that pretty much they would do a mixture. Like I think the '90s really excels the most also at just dark comedy. Like
Hmm.
because like you mentioned all the raunchy ones, but like there's a lot of dark comedy elements in say a sci-fi indie that would be showing the end of the world but didn't have the budget to show it, or a
Hmm.
slasher is like the guy at night he's a stalker, but in the daytime he's a salesman and he's going to
Right.
kill his boss, or he's going to do all these
Well, then
other
you
awful
got like, what's the one with Christian Slater where
oh
they go the
Heather's
bachelor party?
Heather's
No, not Heather's.
oh, very bad things, yes.
Very Bad Things, or
Yes.
like, yeah,
And I
like
got that
that
mixed
was
up with
dark.
so many other movies that would do a mixture of
I mean, that's like the
elements like
original Hangover, but not as dark, Or like,
yeah.
was it 10 Heads in a Duffel Bag?
Oh,
Like,
and that's another interesting movie because like it it's almost kind of like the Boondock Saints. Like depending
hmm.
on what crowd you're in, there's going to people are going to be like, oh, that fucking terrible movie, and then there's other people who are just like, oh, it's in my top 100 movies of
Right.
all time, and it's just so funny to see. This is definitely yes the blooming of the movie that people finally just ratchet up the courage to defend.
Yeah.
And near the end, you do start seeing, I hate to mention it, but this is definitely where you start seeing websites that start being in the inner critical circle. It's not just, Peter Travers or Roger Ebert, who I both, don't get me wrong, I think they're very great critics in their own right. But, and as much as I hate Joe Blow, that was kind of where I started noticing anyone could basically be a critic and make money doing it, make,
Yeah.
make ads, go to a festival, just sign up for a screener pass and
Yeah.
invites to all these festivals. I don't know how they keep a job, unless they got a partner or whatever back in that day, but that's what they had to do. Is like you had to do either a boring office job and then ask for time off to go to a festival,
Yeah.
and post a review the following night and gain
Somebody's
traction.
buying it.
Yeah. And I love how, I mean, shout out to other beloved podcasts like Nerdy Bitches and Podcasting After Dark. They tackled so many other movies that the soundtrack was bigger than the movie because it was promoted heavily at the same time.
So many.
Judgment Night is one. I'm sure you could probably say some of Tupac's movies. Like, I actually know people who are big fans of his work who haven't seen his acting. I'm like, I think he's a good actor.
I think he is too.
He and Brandon Lee and some of these other stars who died way too young are just like,
I know.
I wish they hadn't done that one movie, or I wish they,
I mean, the soundtrack to The Crow is fantastic.
Oh, totally. I know people who have never heard of The Cure until they saw it. I'm like, real? I was raised on The Cure by my father.
Yeah.
He would watch, he listened to all kinds of 80s and 90s music. And, I love how this is the start of music artists who, even though they're constantly featured on movie soundtracks, they later become movie composers.
Trent Reznor.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it.
Oh.
I'm a big NIN head, and there's so many other low-key movies that his material has been featured in. You're like, yeah, and those end credits would not be as haunting without that featured track that he contributed, even, be it already known before or not. It's just, this is definitely, like you say, this is the creativity arising era.
Yes.
And there's just, again, like,
so much creativity in the 90s. It's so versatile.
And shame on all the companies that have sat on all these movies that have refused to give them a bigger release just because it's just not in their interest.
Right.
Even the forgotten 80s and 90s shows that they used to just package as like 2 episodes on one tape deal. It's just like, you guys, you lost your window. You should have kept this alive. You should have, because you get a sense now that many of them are still seeing what people are reading in forums and either liking, not liking the attention they're getting. But there are other times where it's like, just keep interacting with the fans, that if you, and show that you value input, because you see so many during the mid 2000s, you get that transition where movie and TV guys, get to interact over Twitter, and some of them take off, some of them don't like the feedback and start their own social media wars. But the ones that do foster is like, okay, well, see, now we're no longer in the age where we wait to see a newspaper, printed review of a screener. Is like, now we get an actual sense of what's
a newspaper
base, right, what it craves. And I grew up reading newspapers and books from the library, and even just
like, give me the movie section, give me the comics, like I need the movie section right now.
And the comics used to be fun because they would even be parodying a movie that was out now, so you're just like, okay, so even before everyone was spoiling a movie for you, you had at least the essence of the joke of why something was controversial before you made time to see it. There's movies of a beloved filmmaker that I have friends and family that are like, yeah, I never did see that movie, but I'm like, are you kidding me? We talked all the time about this movie. You never seen it? Damn.
Yeah.
I'm the only one in my family who's seen it. And there's other ones that, I hate to say it, it's just, I don't know if it's that I was a 90s kid, because I have other family members who were 90s kids, but they just didn't like certain movies from the 90s. And I was like, I think some stuff has just unfortunately just fizzled out.
We're not aged well.
Oh, totally. I think this is a terrible era for wrestling. It just seems like only now can wrestlers become movie stars. Obviously, people.
I mean, Hulk Hogan tried.
Right. Roddy
you
Piper
know.
was direct to video, but
Yeah.
it seems like
R.I.P.
I know, love you, Roddy. But yeah, I think if anything, everyone's just clinging on to some of the same formulas: the home invasion formula, the stalker formula, the buddy cop formula, and uh,
The world is ending. I
yeah,
mean, that late
impending
90s, but like Armageddon and
the
Deep
Die Hard
Impact.
on a insert
Yeah.
the the scream.
Twister, which was filmed in my home state. So I always have
There
to
you
throw that
go.
one out there.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think a lot of people do start kind of bringing up the whole filmed here. They want to they start getting an interest in movie making, even though again they only
Yeah.
show a segment of it that doesn't tell you the full story. And I mean, uh, there's so many others that is like they missed the window, and there's others they took full advantage, and they still couldn't do something like that today. And it sucks when you say that now because everyone thinks, oh, are you
Yeah.
talking about political correctness or anything? I'm like, no, I'm talking more statistically.
Yeah. Like logistically, like you couldn't go. Yeah.
This is the start of where they become even more dishonest on their tax records on what money they're spending on this. You still see every once in a while just filmmakers taking pay cuts or spending money for an extensive segment that is a well-remembered portion of the movie.
Yeah.
And nowadays you still will see probably 10 to 20 producers on a movie, and you get even more annoyed because then half the time you're just like, you're either mad wondering where the money was spent or why the movie looks so poorly shot with that many producers attached to it. You get a mixture of
Right.
This is kind
like
of
what
the
are we
start
giving
of,
them credit for?
yeah, this is basically the start of the con men producers again. I mean, you mentioned Weinstein, but he's only like part of it. He is we see other guys who they kind of try to become Roger Cormans, but minus the part where they actually, pay people or treat them properly. So it's just like, yeah, it's like we see all kinds of guys, and
It's a cutthroat business for sure.
it is. And it's so funny when you even interview some of these guys, and it's like, oh man, I wish I could go back in time. And now people will show photos of them on set, but I don't get near as giddy as when I see them taken out of remastered Polaroid.
Right.
They've digitally scanned in, and it sees the actual dated.
Like that's for real.
Totally. It's great. But thank you ever so much for being on here.
Thanks for having me. I love revisiting anything about 90s. I love the 80s too, and I love all the 80s reboot stuff. I am ready for a 90s something. I did read that they are doing a That 70s Show reboot, but it's going to be called That 90s Show, and it's Eric and Donna's kid.
I hope it's as good as Blackish or Fresh Off the Boat have portrayed the 90s.
Yeah. Well, I love That 70s Show, and granted, I didn't grow up then, but I feel like it had a really good grasp on the decade. So I'm really hoping that this, if and when it actually happens, like, I watched like the Goldbergs. I freaking love the Goldbergs. It's so much 80s nostalgia.
There's a Happy Madison production. Yeah.
And I need a 90s nostalgia. Like, I need to see some kids watching Beverly Hills 90210 and crimping their hair and wearing flannel and watching Headbangers Ball. Like, I just need all this stuff,
Right. There's even all these other live events that everyone thinks used to be a thing, and now they just want to see what some stupid daytime artist says about the New Year's Eve ball. And it's like, I don't watch the New Year's Eve ball because it's just no one interesting hosting it anymore.
Right. I know.
It's whoever's
Clark.
Right. It's whoever's doing well. And even then, when he started showing his age and they started just having just very unengaging directing, I was just like, yeah. If you're going to keep hiring celebrities who are getting fined by saying inappropriate language before midnight, or talk show hosts or newscasters being the hosts, I'm not with it. I need something more.
Yes, thank you for having me. Sorry.
Oh, thank you.
There, but...
Let's do a quick plug for the SIP list.
Thanks. So the Sip List is a podcast where we sip on beverages. Pretty much always am drinking wine, and then we do top 5 lists. So top 5 of anything you can think of, and now 90s movies is on my list, but narrowing it down to 5 could be impossible. But yeah, it's mostly movies, music, books, pop culture. I would say mostly it's movies and music, but I have an episode about sex, so nothing's off the table.
Yeah. All right.
It's actually a very good conversation, and I would recommend anybody to listen to it. It's not it's not terrible.
I believe you. And few people can gain our trust. Thank you ever so much once again, Amanda.
Thank you.
We'll return after these messages.
Do you ever find yourself thinking about who would win in a fight between Goku and Superman? Hi, I'm James Gavsey, and on the Who Would Win show, me and my co-host Ray ignore anything important happening in the outside world and debate fictional battles between characters from comics, movies, and video games.
We got a new show every week, and almost always am I the winner.
Yeah, not true, Ray.
In the past, we've discussed such matches as Captain America versus Darth Vader, Solid Snake versus the Iron Giant, classic matchups like RoboCop versus Terminator, and even the Muppets versus Sesame Street.
That one was crazy. So if you're a fan of geek culture and love a spirited debate, check out the Who Would Win show wherever you get your podcasts, or check us out at whowouldwinshow.com.
We let things pile up in the DVR, we add them to our queues, we wait for the DVDs and Blu-rays. We time shift. The Time Shifters Podcast. Sci-fi, horror, fantasy, superheroes, comedy, action, film, television, maybe some not-so-current events. Find us on iTunes or at timeshifterspodcast.com.
Cool thing about Blind Knowledge is we are in multiple countries. We are worldwide all across the globe. We are in the US, we are in the UK, we are in Canada, Germany, India, Japan. We're in Australia, y'all. BlindKnowledge.com. Now back to the feature presentation.
Dragon Ball Z, One Piece, Naruto, all things that we love, all manga that were originally published in the legendary magazine Weekly Shonen Jump.
But not every series can run for 300 chapters and have a hit anime. This is David.
This is Jordan.
We're the hosts of Shonen Flop. Each episode we look at manga that ran in Jump that didn't quite make it.
We discuss what it did wrong, what it did right, how the series could have turned itself around, and ultimately, was it a flop or not?
We're on all your favorite podcast apps, and you can find us at shonenflop.com.
Keep on flopping, floppers.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening. It's a jacked up